Chapter 19. It was not immediately that I, too, departed. The hour was late, and my bed awaited me chez Boko, but for a considerable time I remained rooted to the spot, staring dazedly into the darkness. Winged creatures of the night came bumping into the old face and bumping off again, while others used the back stretches of my neck as a skating rink, but I did not even raise a hand to interfere with their revels. This awful thing that had come upon me had practically turned me into a pillar of salt. I doubt if the moth, or whatever it was that was doing Swedish exercises in and around my left ear, had the remotest notion that it had parked itself on the person of a once vivacious young clubman. A tree, it probably thought, or possibly even the living rock. Presently, however, life returned to the rigid limbs, and I started to plod my weary way down the drive and out of the gate, eventually reaching Boko's door. It was open, and I heaved myself through. There was a light along the passage, and heading for it, I won through to the sitting-room. Boko was in an armchair, with his feet on the mantelpiece and his hand clasping a glass. The sight of another glass and a siphon and decanter drew me to the table like a magnet. The sloshing of the liquid seemed to rouse mine host from a reverie, causing him for the first time to become aware of my presence. "Help yourself," he said. "Thanks, old man, though I am surprised you have the heart to drink after what has occurred tonight." He spoke coldly, and there was a distinct aloofness in his manner as he reached out and refilled his glass. He eyed me for a moment as if I had been a caterpillar in some salad of which he was about to partake, and resumed. "I saw Nobby." "Oh, yes." "As I anticipated, she cried buckets." "I'm sorry." "So you should be. Yours was the hand that wrenched those pearly drops from her eyes." "Oh, dash it. It's no good saying, 'oh, dash it.' You have a conscience, I presume? Then it must have informed you that you were directly responsible for the downpour. Well, well, if anybody had told me that Bertie Wooster would let me down—" "You said that before, and I shall go on saying it, even unto 70 times 7. One doesn't dismiss a thing like that with a single careless comment. When your whole faith in human nature has been shattered, you're entitled to repeat yourself a bit." He laughed, a short, mirthless laugh, very rasping and hard on the ears. Then, as if dismissing an unpleasant subject for the time being, he drained his snootful and turned to the matter of my belated return, saying that he had expected me back hours ago. "When I took you for an after-dinner stroll, I didn't think you were going to stay out practically till the arrival of the morning milk. You will have to change these dissolute city ways if you wish to fit in with the life of a decent English village." "I am a bit later than I had anticipated. What kept you?" "Well, for one thing, I was being biffed over the nut by Edwin with a hockey stick. That took time." "What? Yes. He socked you with a hockey stick? Right on the bean?" "Ah," said Boko, and seemed to brighten quite a good deal. "Fine little chap, Edwin. Good stuff in that boy. Got nice ideas." The circs being what they were, this absence of the sympathetic note distressed me, filling me with what I have heard Jeeves describe as thoughts that lie too deep for tears. A man in my position wants his friends to rally round him. "Don't jibe and scoff," I begged. "I want sympathy, Boko. Sympathy and advice. Do you know what?" "What?" "I'm engaged to Florence." "What again? What's become of Stilton?" "I will tell you the whole ghastly story." I suppose the poignant note in my voice stirred his better nature, for he listened gravely and with evidences of human feeling as I related my tragedy. When I had concluded, he shivered and reached out for the decanter, his whole aspect that of a man who needed one quick. "There, but for the grace of God," he said in a low voice, "goes George Webster Fittleworth." I pointed out that he was missing the nub. "Yes, that's all very well, Boko, and I'm sure you have my heartiest congratulations, but the basic fact with which we have to deal is that there actually does go Bertram Wooster. Have you nothing to suggest?" "Is any man safe?" he continued, still musing. "I did think that the black spot had finally passed into Stilton's possession." "So did I. It's a shame it hasn't, because he really loves that girl, Bertie. No doubt you have been feeling a decent pity for Stilton, but I assure you it was wasted. He loves her. And when a man with a head as fat as that loves, it is forever. You and I would say that it was impossible that anyone should really want to marry this frightful girl, but it is a fact. Did she make you read Types of Ethical Theory? Yes, me too. It was that first awoke me to a sense of my peril. But when she slipped it to Stilton, he ate it alive. I don't suppose he understood a word of it, but I repeat, he ate it alive. Theirs would have been an ideal match. Too bad it has blown a fuse. Of course, if Stilton would resign from the force, a way could readily be paved to an understanding. It is that is at the root of the trouble. Once more I saw that the nub had eluded him. It's not Stilton I'm worrying about, Boko, old man. It's me. I view Stilton with a benevolent eye and would be glad to see him happily mated, but the really vital question is, where does Bertram get off? How do we extricate poor old Wooster? You really want to be extricated? My dear chap, she would be a good influence in your life, remember. Steadying, educative. Would you torture me, Boko? Well, how did you extricate yourself when you were engaged to her last time? It's a long story. Then, for goodness sake, don't start it now. All I meant was, could the same technique be employed in the present crisis? I'm afraid not. There was something she wanted me to do for her, and I failed to do it, and she gave me the air. These cirques could not arise again. I see. Well, it's a pity you can't use the method I did, the Fittleworth system. Simple but efficacious. That would solve all your difficulties. Why can't I use it? Because you don't know what it is. You could tell me. He shook his head. No, Bertie, not after the extraordinary attitude you've seen fit to take up with regard to my proposal for sweetening your Uncle Percy. The Fittleworth method, tried and tested, I may say, and proved infallible, can be imparted only to the deserving. It is not a secret I would care to share with any, except real friends who are as true as steel. I'm as true as steel, Boko. No, Bertie, you are not as true as steel, or anything like it. You may have shown that by your behaviour tonight. A real eye-opener it has been, causing me to revise my estimate of your friendship from the bottom up. Of course, if you were to reconsider your refusal to chip in on this scheme of Jeeves's, and consent after all to play your allotted part, I should be delighted to... But what's the use of talking about it? You have declined, and that's that. I know your iron will. When you come to a decision, it stays come to. I didn't know so much about that. It is true, of course, that I have a will of iron, but it can be switched off if the circumstances seem to demand it. The strong man always knows when to yield and make concessions. I have frequently found myself doing so in my relation with Jeeves. You absolutely guarantee this secret method? I asked earnestly. I can only tell you that it produced immediate and gratifying results in my own case. One moment I was engaged to Florence, the next I wasn't. As quick as that. It was more like magic than anything I can think of. And you'll tell it me if I promise to tick Uncle Percy off? I'll tell it to you after you've ticked him off. Why not now? Just a whim. It's not that I don't trust you, Bertie. It's not that I think that, having learned the Fittleworth secret, you would change your mind about carrying out your end of the contract, but it would be a temptation, and I don't want your pure soul to be sullied by it. But you'll tell me without fail, after I've done the deed. Without fail. I pondered. It was a fearful choice to have to make, but I did not hesitate long. All right, Boko, I'll do it. He tapped me affectionately on the chest. It was odd how tonight's events had brought out the chest-tapper in him. "Splendid fellow," he said. "I thought you would. Now you pop off to bed so as to get a good night's rest and rise alert and refreshed. I will sit up and rough out a few things for you to say to the old boy. It's no good your trusting to the inspiration of the moment. You must have your material all written out and studied. I doubt, too, if left to yourself you'd be able to think of anything really adequate. This is one of the occasions when you need the literary touch." Chapter 20. It was but a troubled slumber that I enjoyed that night, much disturbed by dreams of Uncle Percy chasing me with his hunting crop. Waking next morning, I found that though the heart was leaden, the weather conditions were of the best and brightest. The sun shone, the sky was blue, and in the trees outside my window the ear detected the twittering of a covey or platoon of the local fowls of the air. But though all nature smiled, there was, as I have indicated, no disposition on the part of Bertram to follow its example. I got no kick from the shining sun, no uplift from the azure firmament, as it is sometimes called, while as for the twittering birds, their heartiness in the circumstances seemed overdone and in dubious taste. When you're faced with the sort of ordeal I was faced with, there is but little satisfaction to be derived from the thought that you've got a nice day for it. My watch showed me that the hour was considerably less advanced than my customary one from springing from between the sheets, and it is possible that, had the burden on the soul been lighter, I might have turned over and got another 40 minutes. But the realization of what dark deeds must be done ere this day's sun should have set, or for the matter of that, ere this day's lunch should have been eaten, forbade sleep. I rose accordingly, and assembling sponge and towel, was about to proceed to the bathroom for a bit of torso sluicing, when my eye was caught by a piece of paper protruding from beneath the door. I picked it up, and found it to be the material which Boko had sat up on the previous night composing for my benefit, the few things, if you remember, which he wanted me to say to Uncle Percy. And as my eye flitted over it, the perspire started out on my brow, and I sank back on the bed, appalled. It was as if I had scooped in a snake. I think that in an earlier chronicle I related how, when a growing boy at my private school, I once sneaked down at dead of night to the study of the headmaster, the Rev. Aubrey Upjohn, in order to pinch a few mixed biscuits from the store which I had been informed that he maintained in the cupboard there, and how, having got well ahead with the work in hand, I discovered that their proprietor was also among those present, seated at his desk, regarding my activities with a frosty eye. The reason I bring this up again is that on the occasion to which I allude, after a brief pause, on my side of embarrassment, on his of working up steam, the Rev. Aubrey had started to give a sort of character sketch of the young Wooster, which until now I had always looked upon as the last word in scholarly invective. It was the kind of thing a minor prophet of the Old Testament might have thrown together on one of his bilious mornings, and as I say, I considered it to have set up a mark at which other orators would shoot in vain. I had been wrong. This screed of Boko's left it nowhere. Boko began where the Rev. Aubrey Upjohn left off. Typewritten, with single spaces, I suppose the stuff ran to about 600 words, and of all those 600 words, I don't think there were more than half a dozen which I could have brought myself to say to a man of Uncle Percy's calibre, unless primed to the back teeth with a raw spirit. And Boko, you will recall, was expecting me to deliver my harangue at 10 o'clock in the morning. To shoot out of my room into his, bubbling over with expostulations and what-not, was with me the work of an instant. But the eloquent outburst which I had been planning was rendered null and void by the fact that he was not there, and an inquiry of an aged female whom I found messing about in the kitchen elicited the information that he had gone for a swim in the river. Repairing thither, I perceived him splashing about in mid-stream with many a merry cry. But once more I was obliged to choke back the burning words. A second glance, revealing a pink porpoise-like object at his side, told me that he was accompanied by Stilton. It was to Steeple Bumpleigh's zealous police constable that the merry cries were addressed, and I deemed it wisest to leave my presence unrevealed. It seemed to me that a chat with Stilton at this particular juncture could be fraught with neither pleasure nor profit. I pushed along the bank, therefore, pondering deeply, and I hadn't gone far when there came to my ears the swish of a fishing line. And there was Jeeves, harrying the finny denizens like nobody's business. I might have known that his first act, on finding himself established in Steeple Bumpleigh, would have been to head for the fluid and cast a fly or two. As it was to this fly-caster that I owed my present hideous predicament, you will not be surprised to learn that my manner, as I came abreast, was on the distant side. "Ah, Jeeves," I said. "Good morning, sir," he responded. "A lovely day." "Lovely for some of us, perhaps, Jeeves," I said coolly, "but not for the last of the Woosters, who, thanks to you, is faced by a binge beside which all former binges fade into insignificance." "Sir?" "It's no good saying sir. You know perfectly well what I mean. Entirely through your instrumentality, I shall shortly be telling Uncle Percy things about himself which will do something to his knotted and combined locks, which at the moment has slipped my memory. Make his knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand on end, like quills upon the fretful porpentine, sir." "Porpentine?" "Yes, sir. That can't be right. There isn't such a thing. However, let that pass. The point is that you, have let me in for the ghastly task of ticking Uncle Percy off, and I want to know what you did it for. Was it kind, Jeeves? Was it feudal?" He registered surprise. Mild surprise, of course. He never goes as far as the other sort. One eyebrow flickered a little, and the tip of the nose moved slightly. "You are alluding to the suggestion I offered Mr. Fittleworth, sir?" "That is the suggestion I am alluding to, Jeeves." "But surely, sir, if you have decided to fall in with the scheme, it was entirely your kind heart that led you to do so. It would have been optional for you to have declined to lend your assistance." "Ha! Sir?" "I said ha, Jeeves, and I meant ha. Do you know what happened last night?" "So much happened last night, sir." "True. Among other things, I got properly biffed over the coconut by young Edwin with his scout stick, he thinking I was a burglar." "Indeed, sir." "We then fell into conversation, and he informed me that he had found the brooch which we assumed to have perished in the flames, and had delivered it to Lady Florence, telling her it was a birthday present from me." "Indeed, sir." "It just turned the scale. She had had a frightful row with Stilton, gave him the air for saying derogatory things about modern enlightened thought, and is now betrothed once more to the toad beneath the harrow whom you see before you." I thought he was going to say, "Indeed, sir," again, in which case I might easily have forgotten all the decencies of civilized life and dotted him one. At the last moment, however, he checked the utterance and merely pursed his lips in a grave and sympathetic manner. A vast improvement. "And the reason I consented to sit in on this scheme of yours was that Boko confided to me last night that he had a simple, infallible remedy for getting out of being engaged to this specific gal, and he won't tell me what it is till I have interviewed Uncle Percy." "I see, sir." "I must learn it at all costs. It's no use my trying the Stilton method and saying nasty things about modern enlightened thought, because I couldn't think of any. It is the Boko way or nothing. You don't happen to know what it was that made Lady Florence sever her relations with him, do you?" "No, sir. Indeed, it is news to me that Mr. Fittleworth was affianced to her ladyship." "Oh, yes, he was affianced to her, all right. Post-Wooster, but pre-Stilton. And something occurred, an imbroglio of some description took place, and the thing was instantly broken off. Just like magic, he said. I gathered it was something he did, but what could it have been?" "I fear I am unable to hazard a conjecture, sir. Would you wish me to institute inquiries among the domestic staff at the Hall?" "An excellent idea, Jeeves." "It is possible that some member of that unit may have become cognizant of the facts." "The thing was probably the talk of the housekeeper's room for days. Sound the butler, question the cook." "Very good, sir." "Or try Lady Florence's personal maid. Somebody is sure to know. There's not much that domestic staffs don't become cognizant of." "No, sir. One has usually found them well informed." "And bear in mind that speed is essential. If you can hand me the data before I see Uncle Percy, that is to say any time up to 10 o'clock, for which hour the kick-off is slated, I shall be in a position to edge out of giving him that straight talk, at the thought of which I don't mind telling you that the flesh creeps. As for the happiness of Boko and soulmate, I am all for giving that a boost, of course, but I feel that it can be done by other and less drastic methods. So lose no time, Jeeves, in instituting these inquiries." "Very good, sir." "Be at the main gate of the Hall from 9:30 onwards. I shall be arriving about then, and shall expect your report. Try not to fail me, Jeeves. Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of the party. If I could show you that list Boko drafted out of the things he wants me to say, I unfortunately left it in my room, where it fell from my nerveless fingers, your knotted and combined locks would part all right, believe me. You're sure it's Porpentine?" "Yes, sir." "Very odd. But I suppose half the time Shakespeare just shoved down anything that came into his head. Having been en route for the bathroom at the moment when I buzzed off to seek audience of Boko, I was still, of course, in the ordinary slumber-wear of the English gentleman, plus a dressing gown, and it was some little time, accordingly, after I had returned to the house, before I showed up in the dining salon. I found Boko there, getting outside a breakfast egg. I asked him if he knew what a porpentine was, and he said to hell with all porpentines, and had I got that sheet of instructions all right, and if so, what did I think of it? To this my reply was that I certainly had jolly well got it, and that it had frozen me to the marrow. No human power, I added, would induce me to pass on to Uncle Percy even a skeleton outline of the document's frightful contents. Frightful contents? That was what I said. He seemed wounded, and murmured something about the artist and destructive criticism. I thought it was particularly good stuff.
crisp, terse, and telling. The subject inspired me, and I was under the impression that I'd given them my best. Still, if you feel that I stressed the personal note a bit too much, you can modify it here and there if you like, preserving the substance, of course."
"As a matter of fact," I said, thinking it best to prepare him, "you mustn't be surprised, Boko, if at the last moment I change my plans and decide to give the whole thing a miss."
"What?"
"I am toying with the idea."
"Well, I'm blowed. Is this—"
"Yes, it is."
"You don't know what I was going to say."
"Yes, I do. You were going to say, 'Is this Bertie Wooster speaking?'"
"Quite right. I was."
"Well, is it?" "Yes." His table talk then took on a rather acid tone, touching disparagingly on so-called friends who, supposed by him hitherto to be staunch and true, turned out to his disappointment to be lily-livered poltroons, lacking even the meagre courage of a rabbit.
"Where are the boys of the bulldog breed?
That's what I want to know," he concluded, plainly chagrined.
"Well, you understand clearly what this means. Fail me, and not an inkling of the Fittleworth secret do you get."
I smiled subtly and helped myself to a slice of ham. He little knew, I felt.
"I shall watch you walking up the aisle with Florence Cray and not stir a finger to save you. In fact, you will hear a voice singing 'Oh, Perfect Love' rather louder than the rest of the congregation, and it will be mine. Reconsider, Bertie. That is what I advise."
"Well, of course," I said. "I don't say I will back out of the assignment. I only say I may." This calmed him somewhat, and he softened, saying that he was sure that when the hour struck, my better self would prevail. And a bit later we parted with mutual good wishes. For it had been arranged that we should proceed to the hall separately. In his case, Boko felt, not without some reason, that there was need for stealth, lest he be fallen upon and slung out. He proposed, therefore, to circle round the outskirts till he found a gap in the hedge, and then approach the study by a circuitous route, keeping well in the shelter of the bushes, and not letting a twig snap beneath his feet. I set out by myself, accordingly, and arriving at the main entrance, found Jeeves waiting for me in the drive. It needed but a glance to inform me that the man had good tidings. I can always tell. He doesn't exactly smile on these occasions, because he never does, but the lips twitch slightly at the corners, and the eye is benevolent. I gave tongue eagerly. "Well, Jeeves?"
"I have the data you require, sir."
"Splendid fellow! You saw the butler? You probed the cook?"
"Actually, it was from the boy who cleans the knives and boots that I secured the information, sir. A young fellow of the name of Herbert."
"How did he come to be our special correspondent?"
"It appears that he was actually an eyewitness of the scene, sir, sheltered in the obscurity of a neighbouring bush, where he had been enjoying a surreptitious cigarette. From this point of vantage, he was enabled to view the entire proceedings."
"And what were they? Tell me all, Jeeves, omitting no detail, however slight."
"Well, sir, the first thing that attracted the lad's attention was the approach of Master Edwin."
"He comes into it, does he?"
"Yes, sir. His role, as you will see, is an important one. Master Edwin, Herbert reports, was advancing through the undergrowth, his eye fixed upon the ground. He seemed to be tracking something."
"Spooring, no doubt. It is a practice to which these scouts are much addicted."
"So I understand, sir. His movements, Herbert noted, were being observed with a sisterly indulgence by Lady Florence, who was cutting flowers in an adjacent border."
"She was watching him, eh?"
"Yes, sir. Simultaneously, Mr. Fittleworth appeared, following the young gentleman."
"Spooring the spoorer?"
"Yes, sir. Herbert describes his manner as keen and purposeful. That, at least, was his meaning, though the actual phrasing of his statement was different. These knives and boots boys seldom express themselves well."
"I've often noticed it. Rotten vocabularies. Go on, Jeeves, I'm all agog. Boko, you say, was trailing Edwin. Why?"
"That was what Herbert appears to have asked himself, sir."
"He was mystified?"
"Yes, sir."
"I don't blame him. I'm mystified myself. I gather, of course, that the plot thickens, but I'm dashed if I can see where it's heading."
"It was not long before Mr. Fittleworth's motives were abundantly clear, sir. As Master Edwin approached the flower bed, he suddenly accelerated his movements."
"Edwin did?"
"No, sir, Mr. Fittleworth. He bounded forward at the young gentleman, and taking advantage of the fact that the latter, in the course of his spooring, had just adopted a stooping posture, proceeded to deliver a forceful kick upon his person."
"Golly, Jeeves!"
"Causing him to fly through the air and fall at Lady Florence's feet. Her ladyship, horrified and incensed, rebuked Mr. Fittleworth sharply, demanding an immediate explanation of this wanton assault. The latter endeavoured to justify his action by accusing Master Edwin of having tampered with his patent egg boiler, so disorganizing the mechanism that a new-laid egg had flown from its base and struck him on the tip of the nose. Her ladyship, however, was unable to see her way to accepting this as a palliation of what had occurred, and shortly afterwards announced that the betrothal was at an end. I drew in the breath. The scales had fallen from my eyes. I saw all. So that was the Fittleworth remedy, booting young Edwin. No wonder Boko had spoken of it as simple and efficacious. All you needed was a good stout shoe and a sister's love. I heard Jeeves cough. "If you will glance to your left, sir," he said, "you will observe that Master Edwin has just entered the drive and is stooping over some object on the ground that appears to have engaged his attention."
Chapter 21. I got the gist. The significance of his words was not lost upon me. The grave, encouraging look with which he had accompanied the news bulletin would alone have been enough to enable me to sense the underlying message he was trying to convey. It was the sort of look a Roman father might have given his son when handing him shield and spear and pushing him off to battle, and it ought, I suppose, to have stirred me like a bugle. Nevertheless, I found myself hesitating. After that sock on the head he had given me on the previous night, the thought of kicking young Edwin was one that presented many attractions, of course, and there was no question but that the child had been asking for some such little personal attention for years. But there's something rather embarrassing about doing that sort of thing in cold blood. Difficult, I felt, to lead up to it neatly in the course of conversation. "Hello, Edwin. How are you? Lovely day. Biff." You see what I mean? Not easy. In Boko's case, of course, the whole setup had been entirely different, for he had been in the grip of the berserk fury which comes upon a man when he is hit on the tip of the nose with new-laid eggs. This had enabled him, so to speak, to get a running start. And so I fingered the chin dubiously. "Yes," I said. "Yes, there he is, Jeeves. And, as you say, stooping. But do you really advise—"
"I do, sir."
"What, now?"
"Yes, sir. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries."
"Oh, rather, quite. No argument about that. But
if what you are trying to say, sir, is that it is of the essence that Lady Florence be present to observe the proceedings as she did in the case of Mr. Fittleworth, I fully concur. I would suggest that I go and inform her ladyship that you are waiting on the drive, and would be glad of a word with her."
I still hesitated. It was one of those cases where you approve the broad, general principle of an idea, but can't help being in a bit of a twitter at the prospect of putting it into practical effect. I explained this to Jeeves, and he said that much the same thing had bothered Hamlet.
"Your irresolution is quite understandable, sir. Between the acting of a dreadful thing and the first motion, all the interim is like a phantasma or a hideous dream. The genius and mortal instruments are then in council, and that state of man, like to a little kingdom, suffers then the nature of an insurrection."
"Absolutely," I said. "He puts these things well."
"If it would assist you to stiffen the sinews and summon up the blood, sir, may I remind you that it is very nearly 10 o'clock, and that only the promptest action along the lines I have indicated can enable you to avoid appearing in his lordship's study at that hour." He had found the talking point. I hesitated no longer. "You're right, Jeeves. How long do you think it'll be necessary to detain young Edwin in conversation before you can bring Lady Florence on stage?" "Not more than a few minutes, sir. I happen to know that her ladyship is at the moment in her private apartment engaged upon literary work. There will be but a brief interval before she appears." "Then tally-ho." "Very good, sir." He flickered off upon his mission, while I, having summoned up the blood a bit and stiffened the sinews as far as was possible at such short notice, squared the shoulders and headed for where Edwin was squatting. The weather continued uniformly fine. The sun shone, and a blackbird, I remember, was singing in an adjoining thicket. No reason why it shouldn't have been, of course. I mentioned the fact merely to stress the general peace and tranquillity of everything.
And I must say it did strike me as a passing thought that the sort of setting a job like this really needed was a blasted heath at midnight with a cold wind whistling in the bushes and 3 witches doing their stuff at the cauldron. However, one can't have everything, and I doubt if an observer would have noticed any diffidence in Bertram's bearing as he advanced upon his prey. Bertram, I rather fancy he would have thought, was in pretty good form. I hove to at the stripling's side. "Hullo, young Edwin," I said. His gaze had been riveted on the ground, but at the sound of the familiar voice, a couple of pink-rimmed eyes came swivelling round in my direction. He looked up at me like a ferret about to pass the time of day with another ferret. "Hello, Bertie. I say, Bertie, I did another act of kindness this morning." "Oh, yes?" "I finished pasting the notices of Florence's novel in her album. That puts me all right up to last Wednesday." "Good work. You're catching up. And what do you think you're doing now?" "I'm studying ants. Do you know anything about ants, Bertie?"
Only from meeting them at picnics.
"I've been reading up about them. Very interesting."
Vastly, I shouldn't wonder.
I was glad the topic had been introduced, for it promised to be one that would carry us along nicely until Florence's arrival on the scene. It was obvious that the young squirt was bulging with information about these industrious little creatures, and asked nothing better than to be allowed to impart it. "Did you know ants can talk?" "Talk?" "In a sort of way. To other ants, of course. They do it by tapping their heads on a leaf. How's your head this morning, Bertie? I nearly forgot to ask."
Still on the tender side.
"I thought it would be. Cool. That was funny last night, wasn't it? I laughed for hours when I got to bed."
He emitted a ringing guffaw, and at the raucous sound any spark of compunction that might have been lingering in my bosom was quenched. A boy to whom the raising of a lump the size of a golf ball on the Worcester bean was a subject for heartless mirth deserved all that boot-toe could do to him. For the first time I found myself contemplating the task before me with real fire and enthusiasm, almost, as you might say, in a missionary spirit. I mean, I felt what a world of good a swift kick in the pants would do to this child. It might prove to be the turning point in his life. "You laughed, did you?" "Rather." "Ha," I said, and ground a few teeth. The maddening thing was, of course, that though I was now keyed up to give of my best, and though the position he had assumed for this ant-studying session of his was the exact position demanded by the run of the scenario, I was debarred from getting action. You might have compared me to a greyhound on the leash. Until Florence came along, I could not fulfil myself. As Jeeves has said, her presence was of the essence. I scanned the horizon for a sight of her, like a shipwrecked mariner hoping for a sail, but she did not appear, and in the meantime we went on talking about ants, Edwin saying that they were members of the Hymenoptera family, and Self replying, "Well, well, quite the nibs, eh?" "They are characterized by unusual distinctness of the 3 regions of the body, head, thorax, and abdomen, and by the stack, or petiole of the abdomen, having 1 or 2 scales, or nodes, so that the abdomen moves very freely on the truck, or thorax." "You wouldn't fool me." "The female, after laying her eggs, feeds the larvae with food regurgitated from her stomach." "Try to keep it clean, my lad."
"Both males and females are winged."
"And why not?"
"But the female pulls off its wings and runs about without them."
"I question that. I doubt if even an ant would be such an ass."
"It's quite true. It says so in the book. Have you ever seen ants fight?"
"Not that I remember."
"They rise on their hind legs and curve the abdomen."
And to my consternation and chagrin, whether because it was his intention to illustrate, or because he found his squatting position cramping to the limbs, this was just what he did himself. He rose on his hind legs and stood facing me, curving the abdomen, at the exact moment when I perceived Florence emerging from the house and walking briskly in our direction. It was a crisis at which a less resourceful man might have supposed that all was lost. But the Woosters are quick thinkers. "Hullo," I said.
"What's the matter?"
"Have you dropped 6pence?"
"No."
"Somebody has. Look."
"Where?"
"Under that bush," I said, and pointed to a shrub of sorts on the edge of the drive. As you probably conjecture, in saying this I was descending to subterfuge, and anybody knowing Bertram Wooster and his rigid principles might have supposed that such wilful tampering with the truth would have caused the blush of shame to mantle his cheek. Not so, however. If there was a flush to be noted, it was the flush of excitement and triumph. For my subtle appeal to the young blister's cupidity had not failed to achieve its end. Already
He was down on all fours, and if I had posed him with my own hands I could not have obtained better results. His bulging shorts seemed to smile up at me in a sort of inviting, welcoming way. As Jeeves had rightly said, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. I drew back the leg and let him have it just where the pants were tightest. It was a superb effort. Considering that I hadn't kicked anyone since the distant days of school, you might have thought that the machinery would have got rusty. But no, all the old skills still lingered. My timing was perfect, and so was my follow-through. He disappeared into the bush, travelling as if out of a gun, and as he did so, Florence's voice spoke. "Ah!" she said. There was no mistaking the emotion that animated the ejaculation. It was stiff with it. But with a dazed sensation of something having gone wrong, I realized that it was not the emotion I had anticipated. Horror was completely absent, nor had there come through anything in the nature of indignation and sisterly resentment. Astounding as it may seem, joy was the predominating note. One might go further and say ecstasy. Her "ah," in short, had been practically equivalent to whoopee, and I could make nothing of it. "Thank you, Bertie," she said. "It was just what I was going to do myself. Edwin, come here." Down in the forest something stirred. It was the prudent child wriggling his way through the bush in a diametrically opposite direction. There came the sound of a faint and distant coo, and he was gone, leaving not a rack behind. Florence was gazing at me, a cordial and congratulatory light in her eyes, a happy smile playing about her lips. "Thank you, Bertie," she said again, once more with that wealth of emotion in her voice. "I would like to skin him. I've just been looking at my album of press clippings, and he's gone and pasted in half the reviews of Spindrift wrong side up. I believe he did it on purpose. It's a pity I couldn't catch him, but there it is. I can't tell you how grateful I am, Bertie, for what you did. What gave you the idea?" "Oh, just came to me." "I understand. A sort of sudden inspiration. The central theme of Spindrift came like that. Jeeves says you want to speak to me. Is it something very important?" "Oh, no, not important." "Then we will keep it till later. I must go back now and see if there isn't some way of floating those clippings off with hot water." She hurried away, turning as she entered the house to wave a loving hand, and I was left alone to submit the situation to the analysis it demanded. I don't know anything that seems to jar the back teeth like having a sure thing come unstuck, and it was with a dull sensation of having been hit in the stomach by a medicine ball, as once happened to me during a voyage to America, that I stood contemplating the future. Not even the fact that in the recent scene this girl had shown a warm human side to her nature which I had not suspected that she possessed could reconcile me to what I was now so unavoidably in for. A Florence capable of wanting to skin Edwin was better, of course, than a Florence susceptible of no such emotion, but no, I couldn't bring myself to like the shape of things to come. How long I stood brooding there before I became aware of the squeaking that was going on at my side I cannot say. Quite a time it must have been, for when at length I came out of my reverie to find that Nobby was endeavouring to attract my attention, I saw that her manner was impatient, like that of one who has been trying to hobnob with a deaf-mute, and is finding the one-sided conversation weighing upon the spirits. "Bertie!" "Oh, sorry, I was musing." "Well, stop musing. You'll be late." "Late? For Uncle Percy, in the study." I have mentioned earlier in this narrative that I am a pretty good silver lining spotter, and that if there is a bright side to any cataclysm or disaster, I seldom fail to put my finger on it sooner or later. Her words reminded me that there was one attached to the present catastrophe. Murky the future might be, what with all those wedding bells and what not, which now seemed so inescapable, but at least I was in a position to save something out of the wreck. I could at any rate give Uncle Percy the go-by. "Oh, that," I said, "that's off." "Off?" "My reward for sitting in on the scheme," I explained, "was to have been the learning of the Fittleworth secret process for getting out of being engaged to Florence. I have learned it, and it is a washout. I therefore hand in my portfolio." "You mean you won't help us?" "In some other way, to be decided on later, certainly, but not by inflaming Uncle Percy." "Oh, Bertie!" "And it's no good saying, 'Oh, Bertie.'" She looked at me with bulging eyes, and it seemed for an instant as if those pearly drops of which Boko had spoken so eloquently were about to start functioning once more. But there was good stuff in the hopwoods. The dam did not burst. "But I don't understand." I explained in some detail what had occurred. Boko, I concluded, claimed that this secret remedy of his was infallible. It is not. So unless he has something else to suggest... But he has. I mean, I have. You? You want Florence to break off the engagement? I do. Well, go and talk to Uncle Percy, and I'll show her that letter you wrote me, saying what you thought of her. That'll work it. I started. In fact, I leapt about a foot. Golly, don't you agree? Well, I'm dashed. I don't know when I've been so affected. I had forgotten all about that letter, but now as its burning phrases came back to me, hope, which I had thought dead, threw off the winding sheet and resumed business at the old stand. The Fittleworth method might have failed, but there was no question that the hopwood remedy would bring home the bacon. "Nobby, think on your feet. You promise you'll show Florence that letter?" "Faithfully, if you will give Uncle Percy the treatment." "Is Boko at his post?" "Sure to be by now." "Then out of my way. Here we go." And moving as if on wings, I flitted to the house, plunged across the threshold, shot down the passage that led to the relative's sanctum, and dived in. Chapter 23. She came leaping towards me like Lady Macbeth coming to get first-hand news from the guest-room. "Well," she said, getting her hooks on my arm with girlish animation, "I'm nearly expiring with excitement and suspense, Bertie. Did everything go off all right? I listened at the door for a bit, but it was so difficult to hear what was going on. All that came through was Uncle Percy's voice rumbling like thunder, and occasionally a bleat from you." I would have denied, with some warmth, this charge that I had bleated, but she gave me no opportunity to speak. And what puzzled me was that, according to the programme, it should have been your voice rumbling like thunder and an occasional bleat from Uncle Percy, and I couldn't hear Boko at all. He might just as well not have been there. I winced. It seemed to be my constant task to have to dash the cup of joy from this young geezer's lips, and I didn't like it any more than I had the first time. However, I forced myself to give her the works. Boko wasn't there. "Not there?" "No." "But the whole point—" "I know. But he was unavoidably detained by a gardener with a pitchfork and a dog which seemed to me to have a dash of the wolfhound in him." And, in a few sympathetic words, I related how the light of her life had become less than the dust beneath Uncle Percy's gents' Oxfords, and had been slung off the premises with all his music still within him. A hard, set look came into her face. "So, Boko's made an ass of himself again?" "I wouldn't call it actually making an ass of himself this time. More accurate, don't you think, to chalk him up as the helpless prey of destiny? He could have rolled out of the way." "Not very easily. Uncle Percy's foot covers a wide area." She seemed to see the justice of this. Her map softened, and she asked if the poor darling had been hurt. I weighed this. His physical injuries, I imagine, were slight. He seemed to be navigating under his own steam. Spiritually, he did not appear to be doing so well. Poor lamb, he's so sensitive. What would you say his standing was now with Uncle Percy?" "Lowish. This has put the lid on things, you think?" "To some extent, yes. But," I said, glad to be able to drop a word of comfort, "there is just a chance that, wind and weather permitting, the sun will ere long peep through the clouds. All depends on how the Wooster brain responds to the spurring it is going to get in the next half hour or so." "What do you mean?" "Rummy things have been happening, Nobby. You will recall how I tried the Fittleworth patent process for getting out of being engaged to Florence." "By kicking Edwin?" "By, as you say, kicking Edwin. It has produced a bountiful harvest." "But you told me it hadn't worked." "Not in the way I had anticipated. But there has been an amazing by-product. Uncle Percy, informed of my activities, is all over me. For years, apparently, he has wanted to kick the young gumboil himself, but Florence has always stayed his foot." "I never knew that." "No doubt he has worn the mask, but the yearning was there, and it reached fever point last night, when Edwin, sneaking up behind him, let him have it in the pants with his scout stick. So you can understand how he felt on learning that I had rushed in where he had feared to tread. It revolutionized his whole outlook. He shook my hand, gave me a cigar, pressed drink on me, and I am now his trusted friend and adviser. He thinks the world of me." "Yes, but You spoke. I was only going to say that that's splendid and wonderful and marvellous, and I hope you'll be very, very happy. But what I want is for him to think the world of Boko. I'm coming to that. Does the old relative ever speak to you of his affairs? Only to tell me not to come bothering him now because he's busy. Then you wouldn't have heard of an American tycoon named J. Chichester Clam, with whom he has got to have a secret meeting in order to complete an important deal. Mysterious commercial stuff. He has asked me to think out some way of arranging this meeting. If I do, you will be on velvet. How do you make that out? Well, dash it. Already I am practically Uncle Percy's ewe lamb. That will make me still ewer. He will be able to deny me nothing. I shall be in a position to melt his heart. Oh, golly, yes, I see now, and get you and Boko fixed up. Then you show Florence that letter of mine, and that'll get me fixed up. But, Bertie, this is stupendous. Yes, the prospects are of the rosiest, provided... Provided what? Well, provided I can think of a way of arranging this secret meeting, which at the moment of going to press I'm absolutely dashed if I can. There are millions of ways. Name 3. Why, you could... No, I see what you mean. It is difficult. I know. Ask Jeeves. We have asked Jeeves. He says he's baffled. Baffled? Jeeves? I know. It came as a great shock to me. Chap was full of fish, too. Then what are you going to do? I told Uncle Percy I would brood. Perhaps Boko would have something to suggest. Here, I was obliged to be firm. I bet he would, I said, and I bet it would be something which would land us so deeply in the soup that it would require a dredging outfit to get us out again. I love Boko like a brother, but what I always feel about the dear old bird is that it's wisest not to stir him. She agreed with this, admitting that if there was a way of making things worse than they were, Boko would unquestionably find it. I'm going to see him, she said suddenly, after taking time out for a few moments in order to knit the brow. Boko? Jeeves, I don't believe all this stuff about him being baffled. He said he was. I don't care. I don't believe it. Have you ever known Jeeves to be baffled? Very seldom. Well then, she said, and legged it for the staff quarters, leaving me to pass from the hall, I rather think with bowed head, and move out into the open. Here, for a space, I pondered. How long I pondered, I cannot say. When the bean is tensely occupied, it is difficult to keep tab on the passage of time. I am unable to state, therefore, whether it was 10 minutes later, or more like 20, when I emerged from a profound reverie to discover that Jeeves was in my midst. I had no inkling of his approach, but then one very often hasn't. He has a way of suddenly materializing at one's side, like one of those Indian blokes who shoot their astral bodies to and fro, going into thin air in Rangoon and reassembling the parts in Calcutta. I think it's done with mirrors. Nobby was also there, looking pretty dash pleased with herself. I told you so, she said. Eh? About Jeeves being baffled. I knew there must be some mistake. He isn't baffled at all. I stared at the man, astonished. True, he was looking in rare intellectual form, what with his head sticking out the back and all the acumen gleaming from his eyes, but he had stated so definitely to Uncle Percy and self that he had been laid a stymie. Not baffled? No, he was only fooling. He's got a terrific idea. How much does he know of recent developments? I've just been bringing him up to date. You have been apprised of the failure of the Fittleworth system, Jeeves?
Yes, sir, and also of your rapprochement with his lordship.
My what with his lordship?
Rapprochement, sir. A French expression. I confess that I experienced no little surprise on finding you on such excellent terms, but Miss Hopwood's explanation has rendered everything perfectly clear.
And you really have a scheme for bringing Uncle Percy and Clam together?
Yes, sir. I must confess that in our recent interview I intentionally misled his lordship. Realizing how vital it was to the interests of Mr. Fittleworth and Miss Hopwood that you should be in a position to use your influence on their behalf, I thought it better that the suggestion should appear to emanate from you.
So that you can become more than ever the ewe lamb, explained Nobby. I nodded. His meaning had not escaped me. If you analysed it, it was the old Bacon and Shakespeare gag. Bacon, as you no doubt remember, wrote Shakespeare's stuff for him, and then, possibly because he owed the latter money, or it may be from sheer good nature, allowed him to take the credit for it. I mentioned this to Jeeves, and he said that perhaps an even closer parallel was that of Cyrano de Bergerac.
The nature of the scheme which I have evolved, I should begin by saying, sir, renders the laying of it before his lordship a matter of some little delicacy, and it may be that a certain finesse will be required to induce him to fall in with it.
One of those schemes, is it?
Yes, sir. So, if I might make the suggestion, I think it would be best if you were to leave the matter in my hands.
You mean let you sell it to him?
Precisely, sir. I would, of course, stress the fact that you were its originator, and myself merely the go-between or emissary.
Just as you feel, Jeeves. You know best. And what is this scheme?
Briefly, this, sir. I see no reason why his lordship and Mr. Clam should not meet in perfect secrecy and safety at the fancy dress dance which is to take place tonight at the East Wibley Town Hall.
I was absolutely staggered. I had clean forgotten that those East Wibley doings were scheduled for tonight, which, when you reflect how keenly I had been looking forward to them, will give you some idea of the extent to which the fierce rush of life at Steeple Bumpleigh had disorganized my faculties. "Isn't that a ball of fire?" said Nobby enthusiastically. I could not wholly subscribe to this. I spot a fatal flaw. What do you mean, a flaw? Well, try this on your pianola. Where, at such short notice, can Uncle Percy procure a costume? He can't go without one. Fancy dress, I take it, is obligatory. In other words, we come up against the snag the wedding guest ran into. Which wedding guest? The one who beat his breast? No. The chap in the parable, who was invited to a wedding, but having omitted to dress the part, got slung out on his ear like... I'd been about to say, like Boko from the precincts of Bumpleigh Hall, but refrained, fearing lest it might wound. But even without the addition, my remorselessly logical words struck home. "Oh, golly, I'd forgotten about the upholstery. How'd you get round that, Jeeves?"
"Quite simply, miss. I fear it will be necessary for you to lend his lordship your Sinbad the Sailor costume, sir."
I uttered a stricken cry, like a cat to whom the suggestion has been made that she part with her newborn kitten. "My God, Jeeves!"
"I fear so, sir."
"But dash it, that means I won't be able to attend the function."
"I fear not so."
"Well, why do you want to attend the rotten function?" demanded Nobby. I gnawed the lower lip. "You feel that this is absolutely essential, Jeeves? Think well."
"Quite essential, sir. It may be a little difficult to persuade his lordship to take part in a frivolous affair of this nature, owing to his fear of what her ladyship would say should she learn of it, and I am relying on the ginger whiskers which go with the costume to turn the scale. In placing the proposition before his lordship, I shall lay great stress on the completeness of the disguise which these will afford, preventing recognition by any acquaintance whom he may chance to encounter in the course of the festivities."
I nodded. He was right. I decided to make the great sacrifice. The Woosters are seldom deaf to the voice of reason, even if it involves draining the bitter cup. True, Jeeves. The keenest eye could not pierce those whiskers.
"No, sir."
"So be it, then. I will donate the costume."
"Thank you, sir. Then I will be seeing his lordship immediately."
"Heaven speed your efforts, Jeeves."
"Thank you, sir."
"Same here, Jeeves."
"Thank you, miss."
He shimmered off, and I turned to Nobby with a sigh, saying that this was a blow, and I would not attempt to conceal it. And once more she asked me why I was so keen on attending what she described as a footling country dance. Well, for one thing, I had set my heart on knocking East Wibley's eye out with that Sinbad. You've never seen me as Sinbad the Sailor, have you, Nobby? No, you haven't lived. But, I proceeded, there is another angle, and I wish it had floated into my mind before Jeeves popped off, because I should like his views on it. If Uncle Percy meets Chichester Clam at this orgy, and all goes well, he will, of course, be in malleable mood. But the point is, do these malleable moods last? By the following morning, may he not have simmered down? In order to strike while the iron is hot, both I and Boko ought to be there. I to seize the psychological moment for approaching Uncle Percy on your behalf, and Boko to carry on from where I leave off. She saw what I meant. Yes, that wants thinking out. If you don't mind, I'll pace up and down a bit. I did so, and was still hard at it when Nobby's voice hailed me, and I saw that Jeeves had returned from his mission. Joining them at my best speed, I found him looking modestly triumphant.
"His lordship has consented, sir."
"Good, but
I am to proceed to London without delay in order to see Mr. Clam and secure his cooperation."
"Quite, but
Meanwhile, Miss Hopwood has drawn my attention to the point which you have raised, sir, and I am in cordial agreement with your view that both yourself and Mr. Fittleworth should be present at the dance. What I would suggest, sir, is that Mr. Fittleworth drives me to the metropolis in his car, starting as soon as possible, in order that we may return in good time. While I am interviewing Mr. Clam, Mr. Fittleworth can be purchasing the necessary costumes. I think this meets your difficulty, sir.
I brooded for a moment. The scheme did, as he had said, meet my difficulty. The only thing that was bothering me was whether an essentially delicate matter like the selection of fancy dress costumes could be left safely in the hands of a bird like Boko. He was the sort of chap who might quite easily come back with a couple of Pierrots. Wouldn't it be better if I drove you to London?
No, sir. I think that you should remain in order to keep his lordship's courage screwed to the sticking place. His acceptance of the scheme was not obtained without considerable trouble. He would agree, and then he would glance at the portrait of her ladyship which hangs above the study door, and demur once more. Left to himself, without constant exhortation and encouragement, I fear he might yet change his mind.
I saw what he meant. Something in that, Jeeves. Bit jumpy, is he?
Extremely so, sir.
I could not blame the old bird. I've already described my own emotions on catching the eye of that portrait of Aunt Agatha. Right-ho, Jeeves.
Very good, sir. I would recommend constant allusions to the efficacy of the whiskers. As I had anticipated, it was they that turned the scale. Would Mr. Fittleworth be at his residence now, miss? Then I will proceed thither at once.
Chapter 24. Jeeves's prediction that Uncle Percy would require constant exhortation and encouragement to prevent him issuing an 11th-hour nolle prosequi and ducking out of the assignment he had undertaken was abundantly fulfilled, and I must say I found the task of holding his hand and shooting pep into him a bit wearing. As the long day wore on, I began to understand why prize-fighters' managers, burdened with the job of bringing their men to the scratch, are always fairly careworn birds with lined faces and dark circles under the eyes. I could not but feel that it was ironical that the old relatives should have spoken disparagingly of fawns as a class, sneering at their timidity in that rather lofty and superior manner, for he himself could have walked straight into a gathering of these animals, and no questions asked. There were moments, as he sat gazing at that portrait of Aunt Agatha over the study door, when he would have made even an unusually jumpy fawn look like dangerous Dan McGrew. Take it for all in all, therefore, it was a relief when, towards the quiet evenfall, the telephone rang and the following dialogue took place. Uncle Percy.
What? Oh, hello, Clam.
Clam, off stage.
Quack, 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 quack.
About a minute and a half of this in all. Uncle Percy.
Fine. Good. Splendid. I'll look out for you then. Clam, he said, replacing the receiver, says he's heart and soul in favour of the scheme, and is coming to the ball as Edward the Confessor.
I nodded understandingly. I thought Clam's choice was good. A bearded bozo, was he not, this Edward? I asked.
To the eyebrows, said Uncle Percy. Those were the days when the world was a solid mass of beavers. I shall keep my eye open for something that looks like a burst horsehair sofa, and that'll be Clam.
Then you've really definitely and finally decided to attend the binge?
With bells on, my dear boy, with bells on. You might not think it to look at me now, but there was a time when no Covent Garden ball was complete without me. I used to have the girls flocking round me like flies about a honey-pot. Between ourselves, it was owing to the fact that I got thrown out of a Covent Garden ball and taken to Vine Street police station in the company of a girl who, if memory served me aright, was named Totty, that I escaped, that I had the misfortune not to marry your aunt 30 years earlier than I did.
Really?
I assure you. We had just got engaged at the time, and she broke it off within 3 minutes of reading my press notices in the evening papers. I was too late, of course, for the morning sheets, but the midday specials of the evening ones did me proud, and she was a little upset about it all. That's why I'm so particularly anxious that no hint of tonight's doings shall reach her ears. Your aunt is a wonderful woman, Bertie. Can't think what I should do without her, but, well, you know how it is.
I said I knew how it was.
So I trust that all will be well, and that she will never learn of the dark deeds which have been done in her absence. I think I have the mechanics of the thing fairly well planned out. I shall sneak down the back stairs, muffled to the eyes in an overcoat, and tool over to East Wibley on my old push-bicycle. It's only 6 miles. No flaws in that.
None that I can spot.
Of course, if Florence saw me,
She won't. Or Edwin, not a chance.
or Maple.
I was distressed to note this resurgence of the old fawn complex just when everything had seemed hotsy-totsy, and addressed myself without delay to the task of putting a stopper on it. And eventually I succeeded. By the time I had finished pointing out that nothing was more unlikely than that Florence should be roaming the back stairs at such an hour, that Edwin was bound to take a day or two off from his spooring after the treatment I had administered that morning, and that Maple, if encountered, could readily be squared with a couple of quid, he bucked up enormously, and I left him trying out dance steps on the study floor. Well, of course, you can't ginger up an uncle by marriage from shortly after breakfast to about 5 in the afternoon without paying the toll a bit. All this exhortation and encouragement had, as you may well imagine, taken it out of me not a little, inducing a limpness of the limbs and a sort of general feeling of stickiness. I don't say I was perspiring at every pore, but I felt in need of a thorough rinse, and the river being at my very door, this was easy to obtain. A quarter of an hour later, I might have been observed breasting the waves, clad in a bathing suit from Boco's store. In fact, I was observed, and by none other than G. Darcy Cheesewright, doing the Australian crawl back to the bank after a refreshing plunge, and holding on to a bush while I brushed the moisture from my eyes. I glanced up and saw him standing above me. It was an embarrassing moment. I don't know when you feel less at ease than when encountering a bloke to whose fiancée you have just got engaged. "Oh, hello, Stilton," I said. "Coming in?"
Not while you're polluting the water.
"I'm just coming out."
Then I'll let it run a bit, and perhaps it'll be all right.
His words alone would have been enough to inform a man of my quick intelligence that he was not unmixedly pro-Bertram, and as I climbed out and slid into the bathrobe, he gave me a look which drove the thing home. I have already, in another place, described at some length these looks of his, and I may say that this one was fully up to the sample he had given me outside Wee Nook on the previous day. However, if there is a chance that suavity will erase a situation, the Woosters always give it a buzz. "Nice day," I said. "Pretty country, this."
Ruined by the people you meet.
"Trippers, you mean?"
No, I don't mean trippers. I refer to snakes in the grass.
It would be absurd to say that his attitude was encouraging, but I persevered. "Talking of grass," I said, "Boco was in that of Bumpleigh Hall this morning, and Uncle Percy trod on him."
I wish he had broken your neck.
"I wasn't there."
I thought you said your uncle trod on you.
"You don't listen, Stilton. I said he trod on Boco."
Ah, Boco! Good Lord! He cried with honest heat. With a fellow like you around, he treads on Boco? What on earth was the use of treading on Boco?
There was a pause, during which he tried to catch my eye, and I tried to avoid his. Stilton's eye, even in repose, is nothing to write home about, being the sort of hard blue and rather bulging. In moments of emotion it tends to protrude even farther, like that of an irascible snail, the general effect being rather displeasing. Presently he spoke again.
I've just seen Florence.
My embarrassment increased. I had been hoping that the topic might have been avoided, but Stilton is one of those rugged, forthright chaps who don't avoid topics. "Oh, yes," I said. "Florence, eh?"
She says she's going to marry you.
I was liking this less and less. "Oh, yes," I said. "Yes, I believe there is some idea of a union."
What do you mean, some idea? It's all fixed for September.
"September!" I quavered, trembling from head to foot a bit. I hadn't had a notion that the curse was slated to come upon me so dashed quick.
So she says, he responded moodily. I'd like to break your neck, but I can't, because I'm in uniform.
"Yes, there's that. One doesn't want one of those unpleasant police scandals, does one?" There was another pause. He was looking at me in a sort of yearning way.
"Gosh," he murmured almost dreamily, "I wish there was something I could pinch you for."
Come, come, Stilton, is this the tone?"
"I'd love to see you cowering in the dock, with me giving evidence against you."
He was silent for a space, and I could see that he was still gloating over the vision he had conjured up. Then he asked me, rather abruptly, if I had finished with the river, and I said I had.
"Then in about 5 minutes or so I might take a chance and go in."
he said. It was, as you may well imagine, in pretty fairly melancholy mood that I donned the bathrobe and made my way back to the house. There's always something about the going fut of an old friendship that tends to lower the spirits. It was many years since this cheese-wright and I had started what I believe is known as plucking the gowans fine, and there had been a time when we had plucked them rather assiduously. But his attitude at the recent get-together had made it plain that the close season for gowans had now set in, and, as I say, it rather saddened me. Shoving on the shirt and bags with an unshed tear in the eye, I trickled along to the sitting-room to see if Boko had returned from his mission to London. I found him sitting in an armchair with Nobby on his lap, seeming in admirable spirits. "Come in, Bertie, come in," he cried jovially. "Jeeves is in the kitchen, brewing a dish of tea. You'll join us in a cup?" Inclining my head in assent to this suggestion, I addressed Nobby on a point of pre-eminent interest. "Nobby," I said, "I've just seen Stilton, and he informs me that Florence has fixed the nuptials for a shockingly early date, viz. September. It is vital, therefore, that you lose no time in showing her that letter of mine. If everything goes all right tonight, she will be skimming through it tomorrow morning over her early cup of tea." Relieved, I turned to Boko. "Did you get the costumes?" "Of course I got the costumes. What the dickens do you think I sweated up to London for? 2 in all, 1 for self and 1 for you, the finest the Broscoin could supply. Mine is a cavalier. A rather sex-appealing wig goes with it. Yours—" "Yes, what about mine?" He hesitated a moment. "You'll like yours. It's a Pierrot." I uttered a cry of chagrin. Boko, like all my circle, is well acquainted with my views on going to fancy-dress dances as a Pierrot. I consider it roughly equivalent to shooting a sitting bird. "Oh, is it?" I said, speaking with quiet firmness. "Well, I'm jolly well going to have the cavalier." "You can't, Bertie, old man. It wouldn't fit you. It was built for a shortish, squarish reveller like me. You are tall and slim and elegant." "Elegant is the word?" he said, putting it up to Nobby. "Just the word," she assented. "Another good adjective would be willowy, or sylph-like. Gosh, I wish I had a figure like yours, Bertie. You don't know what you got." "Yes, I do," I riposted, coldly ignoring the salve. "I've got a bloody Pierrot costume. A Wooster going to a fancy-dress ball as a Pierrot," I said, and laughed shortly. Boko shot Nobby off his knee and rose and began patting my shoulder. I suppose he could see that I was in dangerous mood. "You need have no qualms about appearing in this Pierrot, Bertie," he said soothingly. "Where you have gone astray is in supposing it is an ordinary Pierrot. Far from it. I doubt if, strictly speaking, you could call it a Pierrot at all. For one thing, it is mauve in colour. For another, but I'll show it to you, and I'll bet you go dancing about the house, clapping your hands." He reached for the suitcase which lay in the foreground, opened it, pulled out its contents, and stared at them, aghast. So did I. So did Nobby. We all stared at them, aghast. They consisted of what appeared to be a football suit. There was a pair of blue shorts, a pair of purple stockings, and a crimson jersey. Across the chest of the jersey, in large white letters, ran the legend, "Borstal Rovers." Chapter 25. It was some moments before any of us broke what I believe is called the pregnant silence. Then Nobby spoke. "Do either of you see what I see?" she asked in a sort of hushed, awed voice. My own was dull and toneless. "If what you see is a gent's footballing outfit," I replied, "that is what is impressing itself on the Wooster retina." "With Borstal Rovers written across the jersey?" "Right across the jersey." "In large white letters?" "In very large white letters." "I am waiting," I said coldly, "for an explanation, Fittleworth." Nobby uttered a passionate cry. "I can give the explanation. Boko has gone and made an ass of himself again." Cringing beneath her flaming eye, the wretched man broke into a storm of protests. "I haven't! I swear I haven't, darling." "Come, Boko," I said sternly. I had no wish to grind the man into the dust, but he had the wages of sin coming to him. A cavalier costume and a mauve
if your story is to be credited, Pierrot, have changed, while in your custody, into a football kit belonging apparently to an athlete who turns out for the Borstal Rovers, though I wouldn't have said offhand that there was such a team. Someone has blundered, and all the evidence points to you." Boko had tottered to a chair, and was sitting in it with his head in his hands. He emitted a sudden yip. "Cat's meat!" he cried. "I see it all. It was that chump Cat's meat. Before starting to return here," he proceeded, looking up and looking quickly down again as his eye collided with Nobby's, "I stopped in at the drones to get one for the road. Cat's meat Potter Purbright was there. We fell into conversation, and it turned out that he, too, was going to a fancy-dress binge tonight. We chatted for a while of this and that, and then he looked at his watch and found that he had only just time to catch his train and buzzed off. What happened is obvious. Rendered cockeyed by haste, he took my suitcase in mistake for his own. And if you're going to make out that that was my fault," said Boko, speaking now with some spirit, "then all I can say is there's no justice in the world, and that it's a fat lot of use being as innocent as the driven snow." This appeal to our better feelings was not without its effect. Nobby flung herself into his arms, cooing over him to a considerable extent, and even I was compelled to admit that he'd been more sinned against than sinning. "Still, it's all right," said Boko, now definitely chirpy once more. "Cat's meat and I are about the same build, so I can wear this number. I would prefer, of course, not to have to flaunt myself before East Wibley as a member of the Borstal Rovers, but one realizes that this is not a time when one can pick and choose. Yes, I can take it." I mentioned a point which he appeared to have overlooked. "And how about me? I've got to be there too, to pave the way for you with Uncle Percy. A lot of solid talking will be required before it will be any use you approaching him. If I'm not at this East Wibley orgy, you might just as well stay at home." My words, as I had anticipated, produced a marked sensation. Nobby gave a sort of distraught hiccup, like a bull-pup choking on a rubber bone, and Boko confessed with a moody oath that he hadn't thought of that. "Think of it now," I said. "Or better," I went on as the door opened, "ask Jeeves what his views on the matter are. You will probably have something to suggest, eh, Jeeves?" "Sir?" "A snag has arisen in our path, an act of God having left us a costume short," I explained, "and we are frankly baffled." He placed the tea tray on the table and listened with respectful interest while we laid the facts before him. "Might I take a short walk, sir," he said when we had finished, "and think the problem over?" "Certainly, Jeeves," I replied, concealing a slight pang of disappointment, for I had hoped that he might have come across with an immediate solution. "By all means take a short walk. You will find us here on your return." He oiled off, and we settled down to an informal debate, in which the note of hope was conspicuous by its A. It could scarcely escape the attention of three keen minds like ours that what looked like dishing us was the matter of time. It was now well past 5 o'clock, which rendered out of the question the idea of another quick dash to the metropolis and a second visit to the establishment of the Bros Cohen. Zealous though they are in their self-chosen task of supplying the populace with clothing, there comes a moment when these merchants call it a day and put up the shutters. Not even by exceeding the speed limit all the way could a driver, starting from Steeple Bumpleigh now, reach the Emporium in time to do business. Long ere he could arrive, the Bros and their corps of assistants would have retired to their various residences and be relaxing over good books. As for the chance of securing anything in the nature of a costume in Steeple Bumpleigh, that, it seemed to us, could be ruled out altogether. At the beginning of this chronicle, I gave a brief description of this hamlet, showing it to be rich in honeysuckle-covered cottages and apple-cheeked villagers, but that let it out. It only had one shop, that so ably conducted by Mrs. Greenlees opposite the Jubilee watering trough, and this, after it had supplied you with string, pink sweets, sides of bacon, tinned goods, and Old Moore's Almanac, was a spent force. Taking it all for all accordingly, the situation seemed pretty bleak. When I tell you that the best suggestion was the one advanced by Boko, that I should strip to a loincloth and smear myself with boot polish and go to the dance as a Zulu chief, you will see how little constructive progress had been made by the time the door opened and Jeeves was once more in our midst.
There is something about the mere sight of this number-one-sized hatted man that seldom fails to jerk the beholder from despondency's depths in times of travail. Although reason told us that he couldn't possibly have formulated a scheme for dragging home the gravy, we hailed him eagerly. "Well?" I said. "Well?" said Boko. "Well?" said Nobby. "Any luck, Jeeves?" I asked. He inclined the coconut.
"Yes, sir. I am happy to say that I have been successful in finding a solution to the problem confronting you."
"Gosh!" cried Nobby, stunned to the core. "Egad!" cried Boko, the same. "Well, I'm blowed!" I ejaculated, ibid. "You have? I wouldn't have thought it possible. Would you, Boko?"
"I certainly wouldn't."
"Or you, Nobby?" "Not in a million years." "Well, there it is. That's Jeeves. Where others merely smite the brow and clutch the hair, he acts. Napoleon was the same." Boko shook his head.
"You can't class Napoleon with Jeeves."
"Like putting up a fairish selling plater against a classic yearling," agreed Nobby. "Napoleon had his moments," I urged.
"On a very limited scale compared with Jeeves," said Boko. "I have nothing against Napoleon, but I cannot see him sauntering out into Steeple Bumpleigh at 5:30 in the afternoon and coming back 10 minutes later with a costume for a fancy dress ball. And this, you say, is what you have accomplished, Jeeves?" "Yes, sir."
"Well, I don't know how you feel about it, Bertie," said Boko,
"but to me the thing looks like a ruddy miracle. Where is this costume, Jeeves?" "I have placed it on the bed in Mr. Wooster's room, sir."
"But where on earth did you get it?"
"I found it, sir."
"Found it? Just lying around, you mean?"
"Yes, sir, on the bank of the river."
I don't know why it was, unless possibly because we Woosters are a bit quicker than other men, but at these words a sudden, horrible suspicion shot through me like a dose of salts, numbing the nerve centres and turning the blood to ice. "Jeeves," I faltered, "this thing, this whatchamacallit, this costume of which you speak, what is it?"
"A policeman's uniform, sir."
I collapsed into a chair as if the lower limbs had been mown off with a scythe. The S had been well founded.
"It has occurred to me since that it may possibly have been the property of Mr. Cheesewright, sir. I observed him disporting himself in the water not far away."
I rose from the chair. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but I managed it. "Jeeves!" I said, or perhaps it would be more juster to say I thundered. "You will go and restore that dashed uniform to its bally owner instanter." Boko and Nobby, who had been slapping each other's backs in the foreground, halted in mid-slap and stared at me. Boko, as if he couldn't believe his ears. Nobby, as if she couldn't believe hers. "Restore it?" cried Nobby.
"To its bally owner?" gasped Boko.
"I simply fail to follow you, Bertie." "Me too," said Nobby. "If you had been an Israelite in the wilderness, you wouldn't have passed up your plateful of manna, would you?"
"Exactly," said Boko. "Here at the 11th hour, just when the total downfall of all our hopes and dreams seemed to stare us in the eyeball because we were unable to lay our hooks on a fancy dress costume, an admirable costume has been sent from heaven, as you might say, and you appear to be suggesting that we shall give it the go-by. You can't realize what you're saying. Reflect, Bertie. Consider." I preserved my iron front. "That uniform," I said, "goes back to its proprietor by special messenger at the earliest possible date. My dear Boko, my good Nobby, have you the slightest conception of the bitterly anti-Wooster sentiments which prevail in Stilton's bosom? The man specifically stated to me not half an hour ago that his dearest wish was to catch Bertram bending. Let him discover that I've been pinching his uniforms, and I can hope for no mercy. 3 months in the 2nd Division will be the best I can expect." Nobby started to say something about 3 months soon passing, but Boko shushed her. "Why on earth should he discover anything of the sort?" he said. "You aren't proposing to parade Steeple Bumpleigh day in and day out in this uniform. You're only going to wear it tonight." I corrected this view. "I am not going to wear it tonight." "Oh, aren't you?" cried Nobby. "Well, then I'm jolly well not going to show that letter of yours to Florence." "Good girl," said Boko. "Well spoken, young light of my life. Laugh that off, Bertie." I made no endeavour to do so. Her words had chilled the spine. I don't suppose there is a man living who is swifter than Bertie Wooster to perceive when someone has got him by the short hairs, and it was clear to me that this was what had happened now. However fearful the perils that confronted me if I accepted Jeeves's loathsome gift, they must be faced. A moment's struggle for utterance, and I bowed the onion and right-hoed.
"Splendid fellow," said Boko. "I knew you would see the light."
"Bertie's always so reasonable," said Nobby.
"Clear-thinking chap, very level-headed," agreed Boko. "Then we're all set, eh? You come to the ball, of which in such a costume you can scarcely fail to be the belle, and you lurk till you have ascertained that old Worplesdon has had a satisfactory conference with Clam. If all has gone well, you buttonhole him and give me a build-up. As soon as he is in melting mood, you give me the high sign, and I carry on from there, while you come home and turn in with an easy mind. I doubt the whole thing, your part of it, will take more than half an hour. And now I think I'd better be stepping along and taking Stilton a raincoat. No doubt he has a spare uniform at his residence, but one would like to get him there without causing comment. We can't have chaps roaming the countryside in the nude. All right for the Riviera, no doubt, but thank God we have a stricter code in Steeple Bumpleigh."
He pushed off, taking Nobby with him, and I turned to Jeeves, who during these exchanges had been standing completely motionless, looking like a stuffed owl, his habit on occasions when he's among those present but has not been invited to join in the chit-chat. "Jeeves," I said.
"Sir?"
he responded, coming to life in a deferential sort of way. I did not mince my words. "Well, Jeeves," I said, and my face was hard and cold, "you appreciate the set-up, I trust. Thanks to you, I am as properly up against it as I can remember being in the course of a not uneventful career. My position, as I see it, is roughly that of one who has removed a favourite cub from the custody of a rather more than usually short-tempered tigress, and is obliged to carry it on his person in the animal's immediate neighbourhood. I am not a weak man, Jeeves, but when I think of what will happen if Stilton cops me while I am draped in that uniform, it makes my knotted and combined locks— what was that gag of yours?
"Apart, sir, and each particular hair—"
"Stand on end, wasn't it?"
"Yes, sir, like quills upon the fretful porpentine."
"That's right, and that brings me back to it. What the dickens is a porpentine?"
"A porcupine, sir."
"Oh, a porcupine. Why didn't you say that at first? It's been worrying me all day. Well, that, as I say, is the position, Jeeves, and is you who have brought it about."
"I acted from the best motives, sir. It seemed to me that at all costs it was essential that you take part in tonight's festivities."
I saw his point. If there's one thing the Woosters are, it's fair-minded. We rise, but we are just. "Yes," I assented with a moody nod. "I suppose you meant well. And no doubt in a sense you did the right and judicious thing. But you can't get away from it that mine is a fearful predicament. One false step, and Stilton will be on the back of my neck, shouting for justices of the peace to come and sentence me to a long spell in the cooler. And apart from that, has it occurred to you that this Cheesewright is about 40 inches more round the chest and 8 inches more round the head than me? Clad in his uniform, and especially wearing his helmet, I shall look like a Keystone Cop. Why, dash it, I'd rather go to this binge as the meanest Pierrot. Still, I suppose my bally preferences don't count."
"I fear not, sir. For no rash youth— if you will pardon me, sir, the expression is Mr. Bernard Shaw's, not my own— for no rash youth that in this star-crossed world fate drives us all to find our chiefest good in what we can and not in what we would."
Again I saw his point. "Quite," I responded. "Yes, I suppose the bullet must be bitten. Right-ho, Jeeves," I said, summoning to my aid all the splendid Worcester fortitude. "Lead me to it." Chapter 26. It had been Boko's idea that he and I should make the journey to East Wibley in his car, he at the wheel, I at his side, so that if there were any minor details to be settled which we had overlooked, we could get them ironed out before arrival, thus achieving a perfect preparedness and avoiding any chance of last-minute stymies. To this suggestion, though admitting its basic soundness, I demurred. In fact, when I say I demurred, I ought to put it stronger. I more or less recoiled in horror. I had been Boko's passenger on a previous occasion, and it was not an experience one would wish to repeat. Put an author in the driver's seat of a car, and his natural goofiness seems to become intensified. Not only did Boko persistently overtake on blind corners, but he did it with a dreamy, far-away look in his eyes, telling one the plot of his next novel the while, and not infrequently removing both hands from the wheel in order to drive home some dramatic point with gestures. Another reason why I preferred to travel in the Wooster two-seater was that I was naturally anxious to get home and out of that uniform as speedily as possible. And, of course, it would be necessary, if all went well, for Boko to linger on and talk turkey to Uncle Percy. My qualms regarding spending the evening in Stilton's plumage had in no way diminished with the passage of time. I still viewed the ordeal with concern. Boko, returning from his errand of mercy to the zealous officer, had reported that the latter had seemed a bit upset about it all, and inclined to suspect me of being the motivating force behind the outrage. To this, Boko had rather cleverly replied by saying it was far more likely to have been young Edwin who had done the horrid deed. There comes a moment, he had pointed out, in the life of every Boy Scout, when he suddenly feels fed up with doing acts of kindness, and allows his human side to get uppermost. On such occasions, the sight of a policeman's uniform lying on the riverbank would, he maintained, call to such a scout like deep calling to deep, and prove practically irresistible. He told me he thought he had lulled Stilton's suspicions all right. This, of course, was all very well as far as it went, but I could not conceal it from myself that if Stilton were to see me wearing the uniform, his suspicions would pretty damn soon come unlulled. He might or might not have what it takes to make a man a mastermind of Scotland Yard, but he unquestionably had sufficient intelligence, should such a contingency occur, to put two and two together, as the expression is. I mean to say, a policeman who has had his uniform pinched, and later in the day comes on someone swathed in it, is practically bound to fall into a certain train of thought. "No, Boko," I said. "I proceed to the tryst under my own steam, and I come away the moment I have completed my share in the proceedings, driving like the wind." And so it was arranged. Well, of course, it being so essential for me to get to the scene of operations in good time, you might have known what would happen. At about the halfway mark, the old two-seater suddenly faded out, coming to a placid standstill in prettily wooded country miles from anywhere. And as I don't know the first thing about fixing a car, my talents being limited to twisting the wheel and tooting the tooter, I had to wait there till the United States Marines arrived. These took the shape, at about 11:45, of a kindly bird in a lorry, who on being hailed put everything right with a careless twiddle of the fingers so rapidly that he had occasion to spit only twice from start to finish. I thanked him, flung him a purse of gold, and proceeded on my way, fetching up at journey's end just as the local clocks were striking midnight. The interior of the East Wibley Town Hall presented a gay and fairy-like appearance. Coloured lanterns hung from the roof, there was a good deal of smilax here and there, and on all sides the eye detected fair women and brave men. One of the latter, a footballer in the striking colours of the Borstal Rovers, detached himself from the throng and arrested my progress, full of recriminations. "Bertie, you outstanding louse," said Boko, for it was he. "Where the devil have you been? I was expecting you hours ago." I explained the reasons for my delay, and he said peevishly that I was just the sort of chap whose car would break down when every moment was precious, adding that it was a lucky thing that it hadn't been me they sent to bring the good news from Aix to Ghent, because if it had been, Ghent would have got it first in the Sunday papers. "It's going to be touch and go, Bertie," he proceeded. "A wholly unforeseen situation has arisen. Old Worplesdon has gone to earth in the Babar and is lowering the stuff by the pailful." "But that's fine," I said. "The significance of his actions has probably escaped you, but I can read between the lines. It means that he has seen Clam, and that everything is satisfactorily fixed up." He clicked his tongue impatiently. "Of course it does, but the frightful danger is that at any moment he may pass completely out, and then where are we?" I saw what he meant, and it was as if a hand of ice had been placed on my heart. No wonder he had used the words frightful danger. The peril was hideous. Our whole plan of strategy called for an Uncle Percy in whom the neap tide of the milk of human kindness was at its height. A blind and speechless Uncle P, stacked up against the wall in a corner of the bar like an umbrella in an umbrella stand, would defeat all our aims. "Go to him without a second's delay," said Boko urgently. "Pray heaven it may not be too late." The words had scarcely left his lips before I was skimming barwards like a greyhound released from the slips. And it was with profound relief that I saw that I was in time. Uncle Percy had not passed out. He was still up and doing, playing the genial host to a platoon of friends and admirers who had plainly come to look on him in the light of a public drinking fountain. I was just starting to head in his direction when the band struck up another tune, and his pals swallowed theirs quick and streamed out, leaving the old relative leaning back in his chair with his feet on the table. I lost no time in stepping up and fraternizing. "What ho, Uncle Percy," I said.
"Ah, Bertie," he replied.
He shut one eye and scrutinized me narrowly.
"I am right," he queried, "in supposing that it is Bertie Wooster rattling about inside that helmet?"
"It is," I replied shortly. The uniform and helmet were proving even roomier than I had feared they would be, and I was about fed up with them. The almost universal merriment which had greeted me as I passed through the crowd of revellers had been hard to bear. The Woosters are not accustomed to getting the horses laugh when they lend their presents to fancy dress dances.
"It doesn't fit. It's too large. You should change your hatter or your armourer or whatever it is. Still, be that as it may, tiddly-om-pom-pom. Sit down and have some of this disgusting champagne, Bertie. I'll join you."
I thought it best to speak the word in season. "Haven't you had enough, Uncle Percy?" He weighed this.
"If what you mean by that question is, am I stinko?" he replied, "in a broad, general sense, you are right. I am stinko. But everything is relative, Bertie. You, for instance, are my relative, and I am your relative. And the point I want to make is that I am not one bit as stinko as I am going to be later on. This is a night for unstinted rejoicing, my dear boy. And if you think I am not going to rejoice, and unstintedly at that, then I reply, watch me. That's all I say, watch me."
The spectacle of an uncle, even if only an uncle by marriage, going down for the third time in a sea of dance champagne, can never be an agreeable one. But though I mourned as a nephew, I'm bound to say I found myself pretty bucked in my capacity of ambassador for Boko. Pie-eyed, even plastered, this man might be, but there was no mistaking his geniality. He was like something out of Dickens, and I saw that he was going to be clay in my hands.
"I've seen Clem," he proceeded.
"You have?"
"With the naked eye, and I refuse to believe that Edward the Confessor really looked like that. Nobody presenting such an obscene appearance as J. Chichester Clam could possibly have held the throne of England for 5 minutes. Lynching parties would have been organised, knights sent off to cope with the nuisance with battle-axes."
"Is everything all right?"
"Everything's fine, except that I'm beginning to see 2 of you, and 1 was ample."
"I mean, you've had your conference."
"Oh, our conference. Yes, we had that. And I don't mind telling you, if you can hear me from inside that helmet, that I put it all over him. When he looks at that agreement we sketched out on the back of the wine list, an agreement, I may mention, legally witnessed by the chap behind the bar and impossible to get out of, he'll realize that he's practically given me his bally shipping line. That is why I say, and with all the emphasis at my disposal, tiddly-om-pom-pom! Fill your glass, Bertie! Don't spare the vitriol!"
I felt that the word of praise would not be amiss. However mellowed a man may be, it never hurts to mellow him a bit more by giving him the old oil. Smooth work, Uncle Percy.
"You may well say so, my boy."
"There can't be many fellows about with brains like yours."
"There aren't."
"Very creditable to you, the whole thing. I mean, considering your condition."
"You allude to my being tight?" Quite. But I wasn't tight when I was dealing with Clam, though my shoes were. I seem,"
he said, his lips contorted by a spasm of pain,
to have come out in a pair of shoes about 11 sizes too small, and they're nipping me like nobody's business. I'm going to look for a quiet spot where I can take 'em off for a bit.
I drew my breath in sharply. I had seen the way. I suppose this is how great generals win battles, by suddenly spotting the right course to pursue and immediately pulling up their socks and snapping into it. You see, what I had been alive to all along had been the danger that this man, as soon as I switched the conversation to the subject of Boko, would turn on his heel and stalk off, leaving me flat. Catch him with his shoes off, and this problem would not arise. An uncle by marriage with only socks on finds it dashed difficult to turn on his heel, especially if he's sitting in a car. And it was into a car that I proposed to decant this Percy. What you want, I said, is to go and sit in a car.
I haven't got a car. I tooled over on my pushbike, and a hell of a sweat it was, taxing the unaccustomed calf muscles like Billy O.
I'll find a car.
Not that rotten little two-seater of yours, I trust. I shall require space. I want to stretch my legs out and relax. The calves are still throbbing.
No, this is a bigger, better car altogether, the property of a friend of mine.
Will you object to my taking my shoes off?
Not a bit.
Excellent. Lead the way then, my boy. Before starting, however, I'd better procure another quart of this gooseberry cider and take it along.
If you think it advisable.
Not merely advisable, imperative. One doesn't want to lose a moment.
I had no difficulty in spotting Boko's car. It was the thing about the size of a young tank, which he had bought second-hand in his less oofy days, and refused to part with because its admirable solidity served him so well in the give and take of traffic. He told me once that it brushed ordinary sports models aside like flies, and that his money would be on it, even in the event of collision with an omnibus. I ushered the old relative into its cavernous depths, and he removed the shoes. Not till he was safely reclining on his spine, twiddling his toes out of the window so that the cool night air could play on them, did I start to bring up the big item on the agenda paper. "So you slipped it across Clam, did you, Uncle Percy?" I said. "Splendid! Capital! And after accomplishing so notable a business triumph, you are, I take it, feeling pretty benevolent towards your fellow men."
"I love them all," he said handsomely. "I look on the entire human species with a kindly and indulgent eye."
"Well, that's fine."
"Always excepting, of course, the foe of the species, the hellhound Fittleworth."
This wasn't so good. "Would you make exceptions, Uncle Percy, on a night like this?"
"On this or any other night, and also by day. Fittleworth invites me to lunch."
"I know, he told me."
"And wantonly causes spiders to emerge from the salt cellar."
"I know, but..."
"Roams my grounds, viciously locking my business associates in potting sheds."
"I know, quite, but..."
"And to top it all off, lurks in my grass like a running grasshopper, so that I can't stir a step without treading on him. When I reflect that I have not dissected Fittleworth limb by limb and danced on his remains, my moderation astounds me. Don't talk to me about Fittleworth."
"But that's just what I want to talk about. I want to plead his cause. You're aware, Uncle Percy," I said, bringing a bit of a tremolo into the old voice, "that he loves young Nobby."
"So I've been informed, dashes chic."
"It'd be an ideal match. You and he may not always have seen eye to eye in such matters as spiders in salt cellars, but you can't get away from it that he is one of the hottest of England's younger litterateurs. He earns more per annum than a cabinet minister."
"He ought to be ashamed of himself if he didn't. Have you ever met a cabinet minister? I know dozens, and not one of them that wouldn't be grossly overpaid at 30 shillings a week."
"He could support Nobby in the style to which he's accustomed."
"No, he couldn't. Ask me why not."
"Why not?"
"Because I'm jolly well not going to let him."
"But he loves Uncle Percy."
"Has he got an Uncle Percy?"
I saw that unless prompt steps were taken, we should be getting muddled. When I say he loves Uncle Percy, I explained, I don't mean he loves verb transitive Uncle Percy accusative. I mean he loves, comma, Uncle Percy, exclamation mark. Even while uttering the words, I had had a fear lest I might be making the thing a shade too complex for one in the relative's condition. And so it proved.
Bertie, he said gravely, I should have watched you more carefully. You're tighter than I am. No. Then just go over that observation of yours again, slowly. I would be the last man to dispute that my faculties are a little blurred, but
I only said that he loved and shoved in an Uncle Percy at the end of my remarks.
Addressing me, you mean?
Yes.
In the vocative, as it were?
That's right.
Now we got it straight. And where does it get us? Just where we were before. You say, he loves my ward Zenobia. I reply, all right, let him, and I hope he has a fine day for it. But I'm dashed if he's going to marry her. I take my position as guardian of that girl pretty seriously. You might say I regard it as a sacred trust. When confiding her to my care, I remember her poor old father, as fine a fellow as ever stepped, though too fond of pink gin, clasped my hand and said, watch her like a hawk, Percy, old boy, or she'll go marrying some belly blot on the landscape. And I said, Roddy, old man, his name was Roderick, just slip a clause in the lease, saying that she's got to get my consent first, and you need have no further uneasiness. And what happens? First thing you know, up pops probably the worst blot any landscape was ever afflicted with. But he finds me ready, my boy. He finds me ready and prepared. There's my authority in black and white, and I intend to exercise it.
But our father wasn't thinking of a chap like Boko.
There are limits to every man's imagination.
Boko's a frightfully good egg.
He is nothing of the kind. Good egg, forsooth. Tell me a single thing this fiddlewask's ever done that entitles him to consideration and respect.
I thought for a moment, and when the Woosters think for a moment, they generally spear something good. It may be news to you, I said, that he once kicked Edwin. This got home. His mouth opened and his feet twitched, as if stirred by a passing zephyr.
Is this true?
Ask Florence. Ask the knives and boots boy.
Well, I'm dashed.
He sat for a while, deep in thought. I could see that revelation had made a deep impression.
I confess,
he said at length, raising the bottle to his lips and swallowing about a third of its contents,
that what you tell me causes me to look on the fellow with somewhat kindlier eye. Yes, to some extent, I admit, it has modified my views regarding him. It just shows that there is good in all of us.
Then on consideration, he shook his head.
No, Bertie, I cannot consent to this match. Look at it from my point of view. Fellow lives in my very doors. Give him an excuse like being married in my ward, and he would always be popping in. Every time I took a stroll in my garden, I should be watching my step in case he happened to be hiding in the grass. Every time he came to lunch, my eyes would be riveted on the salt cellar. No nervous system could stand it.
I saw the talking point. But you haven't heard the latest, Uncle Percy. Boko leaves next month for Hollywood. Do you realize that America is 3,000 miles away, and that Hollywood is 3,000 miles on the other side of America? He started.
Isn't it?
Absolutely. He sat for a moment, twiddling his fingers.
I make that 6,000 miles.
That's right.
6,000 miles,
he said, rolling the words round his tongue.
Why, this alters everything. You think Zenobia loves him?
Devotedly.
Odd. Strange. And his financial position is as sound as you suggest?
Sounder. Editors scream like frightened children when his agent looks in to talk terms for a new contract.
And about Hollywood? You're sure your figures are right? 6,000 miles?
A bit more, if anything.
Well, then, really, dash it in that case.
I saw that the iron was hot, and that the moment had come for Boko to strike it. I'll send him to you, I said, and you can have a talk and rough out the arrangements. No need for you to move. This is his car. By Jove, Uncle Percy, you'll be thankful for this later on, when you realize what a bit of a goose you're handing two young hearts in springtime.
Diddly-om-pom-pom!
"Pom!" said the relative, waving a cordial toe, and once more applying his lips to the bot. I did not let the G grow under the feet. Hastening back to the ballroom, I sorted Boko out from the revellers and sent him off with many a hearty tails up and Godspeed. Then, unleashing the two-seater, I drove home, thankful that a sticky bit of business had been safely concluded. My first act, on reaching journey's end, was of course to tear off the uniform. Having crept to the river bank and consigned it to the dark waters, which might or might not eventually cast it up on some distant shore whence it would be returned to its owner, I whizzed back to my room and darted into bed. It was not immediately that the tired eyelids closed in sleep, for some hidden hand had placed a hedgehog between the sheets, practically, you might say, a fretful porpentine. Assuming this to be Boko's handiwork, I was strongly inclined to transfer it to his couch. Reflecting, however, that while this would teach him a much-needed lesson, it would be a bit tough on the porpentine, I took the latter out into the garden and loosed it into the grass. Then, the day's work done, I turned in and soon sank into a dreamless slumber.